The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're now ready to begin our webinar, Exploring Women's Leadership. Next slide.
Okay.
I'm Virginia with Rutgers School of Management and Labor Relations, and I'll be your host and moderator. The School of Management and Labor Relations is the proud sponsor of today's webinar, and we have allotted 30 minutes for this presentation. We encourage everyone to send us any questions you may have. To do so, you will click the orange arrow. This will open and close your controls. You will type your questions into the box and press send at any time. We will respond to questions throughout the presentation. The webinar is being recorded, and a link to the archive version will be sent to you via email by the end of this week. It's now my pleasure to introduce our instructor. Glenda Gracia Rivera is the Director of Professional Development Training at the Center for Women in Work here at Rutgers. Glenda's work focuses on issues of equity and diversity in education and corporate industries through professional development, leadership training, curriculum development, and provision of technical assistance. Glenda, please take it away.
Thank you, Ginny, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm happy to have you all on this afternoon's webinar. Before we get started, I'd like to talk a little bit about what some of our workshop objectives are. And I will say that this is not my preferred method of communication. I'm not a big fan of not being able to see and talk to you all, so you'll have to bear with me. We do have a short amount of time. Some of it may seem a little bit rushed, but there's some really good information I want to get out to you. So the first objective really deals with the who and the what of the problem that we're going to be talking about today, right? So we want you to understand what the data is telling us about women and workplace leadership, right? And then the second thing is the why. Why are these things happening? Why is this an issue? And we're going to do that by helping you identify some of the barriers that exist for women in the workplace. And then the last one is the how, right? So once you know the who and the what and the why, we're going to talk about how do you start to address this issue. And there's where we're going to start to discuss things about what to look for when you're really trying to assess your company's culture of advancing women to into more leadership roles or lack thereof, as may be the case, which is why I have you here. All right, so I want to start off with a quote by Janet Riccio, who's an executive VP at Omnicom Group, and this is one of the largest advertising agencies in the U.S. And this was in response to a question. There was a poll about women's leadership, and she was asked, why is women's leadership important? And so she goes on to say, women's leadership is more than important in today's world. It's imperative. Whether it's the public or private sector, organizations that are led by inclusive leadership teams make better decisions that deliver better results. The qualities that are required to lead in the 21st century include the ability to connect, collaborate, empathize, and communicate, all qualities that tend to be, quote unquote, female in nature. Women in leadership roles position organizations in a way that makes them fit for the future. So what we're going to be talking about, you see that one phrase that's highlighted there, that's bolded, right? Because we're going to talk a little bit about the research, and the research is showing that companies, not only companies, but countries as well, do better when more women are in leadership positions. When teams are more diverse, we see them doing better, right? And then also women's leadership is important because we're more than half the population, and yet despite that fact, we're still not seeing equal participation in those leadership roles or even in participation in the workforce overall. So when that happens, that means that you're only using half of the talent of the company or the country, and then we're only hearing half the story. So we're going to take on three views first. We'll talk about what's at stake when there are limited numbers of women leaders at the top. The first one is talking about about individual impact, right? And how does this impact women as individuals? And the first one is we're going to talk about is pay equity. And I know you've heard this hear a lot about it, especially since probably like 2015. It's been the buzz phrase, media, news cycles, all of that you've been hearing about. What's this pay gap, right? And so what we know is that women will fall dramatically behind men in pay equity really quickly. And then when you compound that with other factors like race and ethnicity and other socioeconomic factors, you're going to see an even bigger pay gap. So, if we want to just look at some quick numbers, when we're talking about white women, and you've heard the pay gap for white women is about 77 to 78 cents on the dollar when compared to men. You go to black women and that goes down even further to 64 cents on the dollar. And yet then when we talk about Latino women, that's even less at 56 cents on the dollar, right? So when we have more women in some of those decision-making roles at the leadership levels, then we'll see that women are less likely to be passed over for some of those promotions or receive unfair raises when relative to their male counterparts. The next issue is career advancement. So when we want to start to look at the issue of women's absence at the top, we can only do that if we're looking at their overall career progression. The underrepresentation, if you're looking at underrepresentation of women being low and it's already a factor when they're starting out the careers, then that means that representation is going to just diminish even further the more that they progress along that pipeline. And so you end up with even fewer numbers at the top. So let's look at it from the business impact too. What's at stake? This slide here references a McKinsey & Company study. You'll hear me reference a few studies by McKinsey & Company because there really are a great comprehensive resource for this issue. And so even after this webinar, if you're interested in looking at more resources and kind of digging into some more reports and information on this, you can go to their website. They have, they have a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of information on this topic. So this is a 2010 study that McKinsey & Company did. They did a global survey of about 279 companies, right? And that found that those with the greatest proportion of women on their executive committees earned a return on equity that was 47% higher than those with no female executive members, right? So, I mean, I don't know about you, but that's nothing to sneeze at, right? 47%, that's almost 50% that they're missing out on. So the next one, again, talking about business impact, a 2018 study that they did delivering through diversity really looked at 1,000 companies in about 12 countries. And what they found was that there was a direct correlation between the level of diversity at the executive levels, and not just the profitability of the company, but also the value creation. And so we're talking about there, looking about creating value for customers that's going to help them sell the products and services, that's going to create value for their shareholders in form of increased stock prices and investment capital and all that. So, from a financial perspective, we're seeing that this is only going to benefit these companies. So not only is it going to benefit the companies from financial and value added perspective, but what they also have been showing is that there's a penalty for a lack of diversity. So you're being hurt. The companies are also taking a hit when there's a lack of diversity. So when they looked at the bottom, the companies that were at the bottom 25% for gender and ethnic diversity, they found that those companies were least likely to record higher profits than when compared to the national industry average. And then last, global impact, right? So this is not just an issue for individuals. It's not just an issue for businesses and companies here in the U.S., but this is also global. This is a global issue. And if we take a look at it, U.S. may be doing better than some countries. But if we're looking at it globally, a lot of the research that's out there, especially in the last 6 months, there's been a lot of reporting out there that says that if women participated equal to men in the global economy, they'd be able to generate an additional GDP worth 28 trillion within the next 8 years, right? So that's about roughly the equivalent of the size of the Chinese and U.S. economies combined. And so that's a huge impact, especially when you're hearing every day in the news about countries whose whole economies are collapsing. Here's a potential strategy and a way to address that issue. And not only that, there are a lot of countries that are facing aging populations, right? And so because of that, there's a lot of pressure on their labor pools, and they have huge gaps to fill. We see that here in the U.S., where baby boomers are aging out, a huge workforce population, and they're retiring, they're passing on, and how do we fill that skills gap? And that's by putting more women into the labor force overall. So let's jump into the specific issue of leadership in the workplace, right? And we'll go into, I know I gave you a couple facts and figures, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. We are a research center at the Center for Women in Work, so we are really big on giving you all of the information that's out there. So I apologize if this is numbers heavy, but it's important for you to be able to put it all into perspective with what the research is telling us. So what is this data telling us about women in leadership? First of all, this is, okay, so these are just some quick facts that we took from the U.S. Department of Labor Women's Bureau. And so we know that in this country, about 57% of women are participating in the paid labor force, right? In relation to men at 69.2%. So it's only about a 12% spread. Like I said, it could be that we're doing a lot better than other countries. However, when you take into account that we are more than half the population proportionally, then those numbers really just don't add up. What we also know is women are clustered in a few industries. Looking at the fields that women dominate, those are mostly the, those that are associated with female qualities. And you're thinking about education or humanities or healthcare work or any of those service industry and retail jobs, right? Those are the industries that women tend to dominate. And not surprisingly, those are the industries in which people are paid less. Flip side of that, men are dominating the higher paid fields. So you're looking at your STEM, your science, technology, and engineering and math fields, your finance, your hard trades, as they're called. So that then leads to the next bullet point, right? In that we talked about before, the pay gap, that we make vastly different incomes than men and than women of other races and ethnicity. So, all of the numbers will show that even in those female-dominated industries, let's say like nursing, things like, those that are associated with female traits like cooking and cleaning and taking care of people. So we're talking about nursing and the culinary arts and things. Women will ascend to the ranks faster and will make more money than women. Today I was just watching a news story about the TV show The Queen, and so this is pretty pervasive in Hollywood. This has become a really big issue in which we're getting to know what some of the pay disparities are with Hollywood. And the show is called The Queen, and the show is about the Queen, but then it was made public that her male coworker was making more than the woman in the title role. So that was pretty telling to me, and that's pretty pervasive industry-wide. And then the last one here is that we know that motherhood has a large impact on all of this, right? There's a really good New York Times article that talks about, it's called The Motherhood Penalty versus the Fatherhood Bonus. And, there was a study done that this was, based on data taken from the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth, which was from like 1979 or 1980 to like 2006. And what this study showed was that men who are fathers are seen as more stable and more committed to their work, right? Because they have a family to provide for. And so that bosses tend to think that they're going to be less flaky or what have you. Whereas on the flip side, women who are mothers are thought to work less and that they're more distractible at work, just a complete double standard. And then what that led to was that men were making like 6% more, right, when they had children, mostly the children lived in the home with them, while women's salaries decreased 4% for each child they had. So, some pretty startling things. Once again, that was a New York Times article called The Motherhood Penalty versus the Fatherhood Bonus, if you want to look at that some more. So we're going to get into a few things. I want some audience participation here. I'd like you all to take a second and think about this question. Right, we're going to get into the actual female CEOs. What percentage of female CEOs are there currently in the top S&P 500 companies? So if you take a second and answer your question in the chat box feature on the right, take a second. I'd like to see what people think. what would your best guess be? Once again, this is in terms of a percentage. You can either type it in the question feature or the chat box feature. Don't all go at once now.
Someone wrote 5%. I don't know if you saw that, Glenda.
Yeah, I do see
3%.
that.
Okay, yeah, they're coming in.
Okay, 25%. Okay. Okay. All right. So if I had a prize, Rosemary would get it. So here we are. This is taken from Catalyst report released just last month. This is the most updated numbers that we have on this matter, right? So here we have women, and so this is only S&P 500 companies. I want to just say that up front. So not necessarily completely comprehensive, but a good indicator nonetheless, right? So when we look at the total number of employees in these companies, those are, we're looking at, once again, less than half, even though we know that women are making up more than half the population. We're looking at 44.7 of the total employees. Then when we move up to that first level manager stage, where we go down a little bit to 36.9. And then once you get to the executive senior level, we're at about a quarter of the way, right? So there's executive 26.5% at that level. The pyramid gets smaller when we talk about board seats. There we're looking at 21.2% of women in board seats. The top earners is a little ambiguous because we don't really know what position. I mean, obviously those are C-suite level, but they could be anything. I mean, they can be, you know, chief human resources officers, chief financial officers, chief marketing officers, other levels like that. But when we're talking about those CEOs, those people at the very tip top, we're looking at only 5%. All right. So in these companies, we're talking Fortune 500 companies, 475 of those are men, and about 25 of those are women. So this slide here includes some research from the Pew Research Center, and I put this here so that you could see this in reference to all of the, in reference to mostly government jobs, right? So because we hear a lot about increased government participation by women in the last couple of years, right? So I wanted you all to see, relative to our government, this is how our Fortune 500 companies are faring, which is kind of a dismal picture, right? When you look at these numbers, most of these government numbers are looking at about hovering at around 20%, with the exception of the governors who's like less than 10, which was kind of surprising to me. I thought that would be a higher number, but you know, look at that in proportion to the 5.4% women in those Fortune 500 companies. So we're talking leadership roles here, right? And so that really puts it into perspective. And not only that, but what stands out to me even more about these numbers is that the government numbers have been were started to be recorded as early as 1965, right? So we see a lot of those in 1960s and 70s where they're recording these numbers of women entering these fields. But look at those Fortune 500 numbers, those two slides that talk about Fortune 500. They didn't start recording them until 1995. And just under 25 years ago, in 1995, we had 0 women in those roles. Whereas we did have women in government leadership roles, Fortune 500 CEOs, we had none. So, you know, that's a pretty stark picture as well. And also it's not surprising that the education field had, you see here, college presidents had one of the highest percentages of female leaders, but still lagging behind men, and that is quote unquote a female dominated career. So what we're looking at overall is slow progress, right? Slow progress to achieve gender equality. There is some studies out there that says that based on, so looking at the current rate of progress, which they really only looked at the last 3 to 5 years of progress, basically it's going to take more than 100 years to reach gender equality in the C-suite, right? So 100 years, people. We're talking 2118, and I'd say let's have a party for that, but none of us is going to be around to see that. And who knows what's going to be happening at that point. So, we have to start addressing this now. We have to start making bold strokes right now to really, advance that timeline, because we really can't wait 100 years to be at equal footing. So let's talk about why people think this is, right? Why is it that women are in short supply at the top of not just government, but business in the U.S.? The bottom here, women don't make as good managers. Not a whole lot of people think that, right? So it's not that, that these are in percentages, even though there's not a percentage sign there, I apologize. But, 7% of women. So it's not just that people think that they lack the toughness, that, that they don't lack the proper skill sets. It's also not necessarily about work-life balance, because only about, 1 in 5 of the people there say that women's family responsibilities are a major reason that there aren't more females in those top leadership roles. But if you want to look at it, look at the top of the list of reasons, right? 4 in 10 Americans are saying that there's a double standard for women seeking to climb to those highest levels, right? They have to do more than their male counterparts to prove themselves. We may have anecdotal evidence of this on our own, right? But this study kind of further validates that we're just held to higher standards. And then almost an equal number of people are saying that, the electorate or that corporate America, we're just not ready to see more women in those top leadership roles. So, there's a lot of perceptions and a lot of implied biases that are at play here that we need to examine further. So let's talk a little bit about the barriers, all right? Understanding what some of those barriers are. In addition to those societal perceptions that we just talked about in the previous slide, what are some of the things that are existing? Now, the first of those is organizational practices. And that just talks about, the fact that a lot of organizational practices that are standard in today's companies really are more reflective of men's lives and situations. I'll give you an example. In some multinational companies, a career path to those senior leadership positions may often include some overseas rotation or assignments, which means that, this assumes that spouses are able to either just pack up and move along with you. And that's a lot less likely to happen for women than it is to men, right? And, picking up your family and moving them to China for 2 years, it's more likely to happen if the man is in that position than if the woman is in that position. And unfortunately, that's just the reality. The next one of these is role models, right? We already know, you've heard the expression before, you can't be what you can't see. And so if there are a few women at the top, at those levels, that means that women have even fewer access to those networks and to those people who could be serving as mentors and sponsors, and they have few role models that they can really go to and talk to about. And then, there's also that old boys network that perpetuates this cycle and really keeps us from advancing into those inner circles, if you will. Okay, the next one is negotiation and advocating, right? So there's also a lot out there that talks about women being hesitant to advocate for themselves, right? And we talked about the pay gap earlier, and part of that pay gap, the pay gap can be attributed to this. If a woman comes into a company and is not able to or doesn't understand how to bargain for a higher salary, or has just never been given tips, or doesn't have the confidence to do that, or is afraid that she won't get the job offer if she doesn't negotiate, if she tries to negotiate a better salary, that means she's coming in at a lower wage than maybe other men at the same level. And once you come in at lower pay in the beginning, that means your salary is not going to move up in reference to relative to those other counterparts who may come in higher pay. So the lower you come in, the lower you're going to go up, and the slower you're going to go up in that salary. So a lot of attention should be paid to those negotiation and advocating skills. Okay, more barriers. There's a whole lot of them. The prototype of leaders, traditional perceptions. So here we're talking about what do people think about when they think of a leader, and just that, that perception of leadership are all, they're often associated with predominantly male qualities. So people just can't get that out of their minds. They tend to think of that when they think of leaders, and that does then hold a lot of women back. Next one is family responsibilities. Now we can have a whole 4-hour webinar on just this one alone, right? In terms of women who are really expected to take on more of those family responsibilities than men. Women are called from school to pick up their sick kid, right? They're more likely to be the ones organizing the birthday parties and play dates. They're more likely to be volunteering at the school for special events. So, that's also one of the barriers. And then last but not least is that double bind, right? So when we talk about the double bind, it's that double standard of being either capable or liked, but not both. So if a woman really behaves in a quote unquote feminine way, she might be liked and people might find her approachable or funny or nice or whatever, but she may not be respected or seen as a leader, right? Because she's kind of too soft. On the flip side, if she operates in a quote unquote masculine way, she might be seen as really competent and smart and tough, but maybe too tough, and she might be judged or disliked for that. There's a really good Catalyst study out called Damned If You Do, Doomed If You Don't, about this double bind, which is pretty interesting. All right, now what do you do about it? All right, how do we start to address some of these barriers? First things first, assessing company culture, right? You really can't start to make any changes at your company if you don't know what's happening, if you really don't have your finger on the pulse. And how do you start to do that? And the first part of it would be conducting an internal audit of your own company, or even if you want to do it at a department level, at a team level or whatever, right? Look at your data, kind of what we just did before. What does it tell you? What are the trends looking like, and what are those trends telling you? Where are the women in your company? Are they concentrated in some of those more administrative, lower paid jobs? What are they getting paid if they're in other roles where there are equal numbers of men, right? You really want to take a look at that and see, confirm or deny what you're thinking is true. The next in assessing that culture is reviewing some of those policies, right? And that those policies, are there ways in which women are being put at a disadvantage, right? Is there a lack of workplace flexibility, or, what are some of the policies in place that are maybe not taking into account the lives of working women and how they may be different than they are for men? All right, a couple of other ways that we can address the barriers. Low-hanging fruit here, build company-wide awareness, right? You really want to start, if this is something that leadership is committed to addressing, then make it a place where people can see that in tangible form. So maybe there are posters or other visuals, maybe there's a group or committee that you all can then host for supporting women's advancement, hosting diversity and inclusion events, really making that front and center for the company so that they can see it. You're not just walking the walk, but you're not just talking the talk, but you're walking the walk and really doing things about it. The next one and the next two are going to be really, really key, right? Implementing those ongoing professional development and training programs. What is your company investing in? Especially for managers, right? For greater impact, you really want to see programs that are sustained over time, something that employees are getting to talk about, that they're getting to understand over a course of time, not something that's just a one and done, or what we call a drive-by training, where you're addressing this in, a half-hour webinar, but something that the company is really going to invest in and sustain over time. And then the last one, which is super, super key, be intentional about how you incorporate diversity into those strategic plans and goals. This, here's where accountability comes into play, and accountability is everything, right? So including this, the matter of diversity and gender diversity, and specifically, if that's the matter you want to address, including those things in core values or key statements about the company, but also like following up, benchmarking some of those things so that you can see progress over time, over a year, over 3 years, over 5 years, right? You really want to be able to see progress. The only way you're going to do that if you put it in writing, and we all know that. All righty, so I think my half hour is just about up.
We are at 12:30, but first, Glenda, I want to thank you. This was a great presentation. It was really, really informative. Participants, Glenda and I are going to stay on. If you have any questions, please feel free to submit your questions now, and we are happy to answer them, or Glenda's happy to answer them. And if you think of any questions along the line, you can always send it in an email, and I can forward them to Glenda. But again, if you have any questions, we're here. And if you have further interest,
sorry,
Glenda. If you have further interest
no, it's okay.
in this topic, we do have a leadership development for early career women program that Glenda is going to talk to you about.
So we have here at Rutgers a partnership between the Center for HR and Leadership Development and the Center for Women in Work. We have a leadership development program for early career women, which is offered in 2 formats. The first format is a company enrollment format in which a company would sign on to do this program for a cohort of women at their company. So they would do that at a group and offer it on site at your location. And the company enrollment model is usually done over 6 one-day sessions, offered over like a 6-month period. So that's one way. Then we've done, and we will be implementing another open enrollment cohort, which is offered to individuals. So let's say your company doesn't have 10 or 15 women that they want to enroll in this program, but maybe there's 1 or 2 women who want to participate and your company's willing to pay for it, or you're willing to pay for it yourself. This is offered to individuals here at the Rutgers New Brunswick campus, and that's offered 4 whole day sessions over 4 months. And our next open enrollment cohort will be starting in about September, and that will run September through December. And it is a certificate program. You do receive a certificate from the School of Management and Labor Relations. I'm sorry, Jenny, were you going to say something?
2 questions came in. Can I?
Okay.
Okay. Any suggestions for addressing these barriers in a small company, less than 25 people?
Yes, so we can talk. I don't want to hold everybody up, but the strategies that I've offered are really, what's the word? They cover the gamut, right? It doesn't matter how large. When we're talking about some of those strategies to address the barriers, that goes for any company or any department, right? We've done this in schools, and we've done it in Fortune 500 companies. So it's not just a matter of company size, it's a matter of what I call readiness factor, in terms of how ready are your leaders to engage in this. It's really difficult. I think the better question is, are your CEOs and executive VPs and HR people, like, are they willing? Are they ready to address this issue? And if that's the case, it's a lot easier. It's much tougher when you're in an environment where there's a lot of resistance to change. But in that case, we can also work with that. But yes, my contact information will be presented later. I'm not sure who asked that question, but definitely would love to connect with you personally, because it's a lot more factors than just company size.
Thank you. The next question is, how can you determine if you are unfairly paid if you're not privy to others' salary?
That's a good one. Unfortunately, in the private sector, it's a lot much harder. It's a lot harder. It's a matter of being able to find out that the information is private. It's not like in the public sector where those things are actually published on the internet for everybody to see. I would look and see if you could do a market analysis of the field, of the job, of the company. You can probably tap into LinkedIn and Glassdoor and some of those other resources, or recruiters who could maybe help you, but finding out specific salaries that other people are making in your company may be a little bit harder. You may just be able to get the ranges of what people should be making or the average. And if you're getting paid below that, then you could start there.
Thank you. Those were the only questions we received so far.
Okay. So in this leadership development program, there are several components. One of the main components is that our participants will build personalized leadership development plans. There are several modules, and throughout those modules, we'll be talking about how to build some of these important things into your own personal plan. The plan consists of developing a vision statement and some specific goals and objectives, and we do that. We do offer, we do facilitate that process for you over the 4 to 6 months that you're in the program. And then we also invoke assistance from your peer coaching groups. I don't want to go too much into that, but just know that there are different modes of learning that we incorporate. And then the program focuses, the modules focus on different things like career advancement, work life and innovation economy, addressing workplace culture, where we talk a lot about diversity and inclusion, implied bias, and how to address some of those things from a leadership perspective, and then also maximizing those social networks that you have to be able to enhance your leadership skills. So it's a really comprehensive program. We've gotten a lot of wonderful reviews on it. If you're interested in learning more about it, I could provide some of that information offline.
Great, thank you, Glenda. So this concludes our webinar for today. Thank you again, everyone, for participating. We hope you found it informative and enjoyed it. You can see Glenda's contact information is here on the screen if you have any questions about the Leadership Development for Early Career Women program. And also, we have our Senior Program Director, Ann Redler. Her contact information is here as well. Please feel free to contact Ann with any questions. Once again, the link to the archived recording of this webinar will be emailed to you by the end of this week, so you will have that available to you. And if you have any questions, again, you know how to reach us. And for more information about the School of Management and Labor Relations, please visit our website, smlr.rutgers.edu. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.